Hello, my God. Welcome, welcome. It is Friday for some. Now,
Yay!
now, welcome to the Week Unspun, a weekly live look at the world through the eyes of PR professionals. And my name is Farzana Baduel. I am sitting in London.
I'm David Gallagher, also in London.
And I'm Doug Downs, somewhere in Canada's Rocky Mountains. It's mysterious.
Now, we have an awful lot to talk about today. We've got Operation Midway Blitz in the United States. Quick take on what brands and communications can learn from President Trump, a new report on leading the era of compounding crisis, and we're going to explain that and unravel UK government logo. Oh dear, something not quite right has happened
Did you
there.
see that?
And then also, and if we have time, we're also going to talk about my discussion that I had with the Beeb about the upcoming Netflix biopic on Victoria Beckham.
Now, we're making time for that.
Oh, yeah, let's hope. Now, there's also just a little touch on breaking news. We have got Palestinians, they have started to return to Gaza's north as Netanyahu thanks Trump for securing ceasefire, and that has just come up on BBC News. We also have Venezuelan opposition leader Maria Corina Machado. She wins a Nobel Peace Prize. Now, over to you, Doc.
Yeah, so while Trump might be earning some headlines internationally, nationally the headlines aren't entirely in his favor. Roll the video for me, David. This is the National Guard issue. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, otherwise known as ICE, has launched major enforcement operations in Chicago and Portland, Oregon, sparking protests and intense criticism. In Chicago, for example, the campaign known as Operation Midway Blitz has led to hundreds of arrests in just a few weeks. Federal officials claim they're focusing on undocumented immigrants with criminal records, members of gangs, but reports show that many of those that have been detained do not have serious charges, and in some cases, they're citizens who were later released. Arrests have sometimes been carried through with tactics that feel deceptive, like summoning people to routine check-ins and then detaining them. Civil rights groups have filed lawsuits alleging unlawful arrests and constitutional violations. The large show of force with armored vehicles, helicopters, and chemical agents has created the impression that entire neighborhoods are under siege rather than simply being policed. For residents, this does not feel like routine immigration enforcement, but like a military operation that is unfolding right there for them on their streets. Meantime, in Oregon, the pattern is centered around protests at the ICE field office in Portland. Demonstrations have mostly been peaceful, but federal forces have responded with tear gas, tactical gear, and mass arrests. About 60 people have been detained since the summer, many tied to protest activity rather than violent crimes. To local communities, again, seeing the National Guard and militarized federal agents deployed against protesters feels less like law enforcement and more like government suppression. That whole image of soldiers, heavy vehicles, chemical weapons in American cities echo moments of deep division in U.S. history, raising fears that the country is moving toward internal conflict. And residents, again, don't like seeing images like this in their neighborhoods. David, I found this pretty jarring to watch throughout the week, and there definitely are PR ramifications here. The framing and the messaging has been all over the place.
Yeah, and you and I talked about this earlier in the week, and I think if we thought we had more time, we were going to break down some of those frames, and maybe we can come back to that if we do have a moment. I think sometimes we had this opportunity in this discussion to step back a little bit and think, what are some of the bigger questions or conversations we could be having as PR people? And I think this whole campaign raises some practical, pragmatic, maybe even, forgive me, I said I wouldn't get on a soapbox, and maybe I will, but almost like existential questions for us. And if you think about how this administration is changing virtually every part of the landscape that we operate in, it's changing the media and news environment. It's, in my view, undermining the validity of the legal system. It's forcing the business community to deal with an audience of one rather than the public. And it seems to be making the message that if you've got money and tanks, you pretty much are the only game in town. And I guess what I'm getting at is that if public opinion is being made not to matter, why do we matter? What's the role of the PR person in a world where public opinion has been put to the side? I think that's what we're seeing unfold in slow motion, and I really hope that these interventions aren't just setting the stage for intentional violence against American citizens.
And the juxtaposition of Trump's persona, his narrative internationally. I mean, Farzana talked about it off the top, being portrayed, at least in the Jerusalem Post, as a peacemaker. Locally, it depends on which outlet you watch, read, listen to. Peacemaker or war maker has changed one department from Department of Defense to Department of War, right? So the entire narrative about his persona is changing.
Yeah, very well could. I know you wanted to maybe kind of extending on this story, kind of, what sort of lessons can we glean from Trump's communication style?
Well, there are some positive things. Andy West had a great post, and Farzana, I think you are or were part of the panel on Trump and his communication style. And I said to Andy online, Trump is the most effective communicator of our age. Fight me. And he said, no fight. And he said, no fight. He said, you're right. Whether the effect is good or bad, that's the whole discussion. Farzana and I did an interview for our Stories and Strategies podcast with Mark Lowe. And it doesn't come out until October 21st, but we did the interview last week. And Mark really touched on something that Trump does extremely well. And he called it the big
good
idea.
theater for us to study as PR pros when it comes to the attention economy, Mark?
Always, and it always has been, not just in terms of the attention economy, but throughout history. I think the two things feed each other. So obviously there are learnings that come from the commercial space and the branding space that come into politics. I think in our present moment, brands probably have more to learn from politicians than the other way around. So I would say, whatever you think of Trump or whatever your political approach is, he is a genius attention entrepreneur.
Yes.
And I think that it's no accident that his background was effectively as a TV producer, because this is the first thing that he understands. He also understands the power of like a mimetic idea. So a big idea which symbolizes something really important. So the building of the wall is the sort of prime example of that on the right. Build that wall. It's not a realistically achievable thing, but it is totemic. It symbolizes something a lot bigger.
When does that air, Doug? The full interview?
October 21, so not next Tuesday after.
Okay, I got to give you a quick reaction, and I probably will be a little more passionate on this. And I'm kind of responding, obviously, as an American. I'm involved with several pro-democracy organizations, and I recoil when people start a conversation saying whatever you think about Trump, because I kind of know what's going to come after that. So putting that to one side, I do struggle with trying to reduce the administration's policies to a case study for brands. That to me, that's like saying, what are the management lessons we can learn from Vladimir Putin? I think maybe there's a lesson you could learn, but I don't know if that's the source I would go to. And these studies, these case studies, it's not the same as the Gwyneth Paltrow astronomer case that we talked about a few weeks ago, or the Cracker Barrel issue and its logo. I know Mark, and I think he's a thoughtful guy, so I don't mean to criticize this based on one little clip of an interview that I haven't fully seen yet. He does make an interesting point about the wall being a memorable symbol, but the big idea wasn't the wall, and I just want to make that true. The big idea in the Trump 1.0 was us versus them. That was the idea. The wall was the symbol. I think in Trump 2.0, and as your first story suggested, the new big idea is the enemy within. And I don't really know what the symbol is going to be for that. But so I do have to point out, I'm very, very reluctant to pretend like this is a abstract clinical analysis of a great TV presenter, and that there are not real world implications to what he's trying to do and what these policies are.
Farzana, what was when you heard Mark speaking? You heard the whole interview. So what was your take?
I think it's a fascinating age for communication, and you can't reduce it down to, one or three lessons learned from the Trump administration. I mean, for instance, if you look at his advisors around him, both in his first sort of tenure as well as the second, you had advisors like Steve Bannon who would talk about actually the art of using sort of a velocity of messaging that just flows one after the other, so much so that the opposition doesn't have time, because they're always on a back foot, to actually counter the narratives put in. And so you do have an awful lot of sort of thinking in how to really undermine, the opposition. So I think there are a lot of takeaways, but I think that there are so many that you actually have to sort of go into one particular aspect and then draw the lessons rather than, the entire administration. I mean, every day there are lessons to be learned in terms of what's effective and what hasn't been effective. So and also I think the other aspect is what's been really fascinating is that consistent drumbeat of messaging of undermining sort of legacy media, fake news. So there are an awful lot of lessons. And I think that, I think it's important that people like us as PRs, that we can be independent and talk about Trump from an effective communications perspective without getting mired into polarized debates about where we're aligned or not aligned politically. And I think that's what's really hard when people talk about Trump and his administration in terms of communications, is that they start wading into what their own sort of value systems are and whether they're pro or against. And I think that's a sad aspect of polarization, is we lose that critical thinking and we stop having that sort of independent lens of scrutinizing effective communications if we just love or hate him. It just creates a lens that distorts, and it's not useful for people who want to learn about public relations.
So I'm biting my tongue, and as Farzana knows, there was a panel that I was invited off of for fear that I might not be able to unstick myself from the political lens. So I'm trying not to do that here. But I have to say, as communications advisors, are we really saying that the lessons we can learn from this administration is flood the zone with misinformation, challenge every institution and system, blackmail the media environment? Is that really what we're saying to the lessons we can learn? Are there actual discernible, useful, positive messages? And if we are we going to shine a light on things like the wall? And I say, in my view, normalize using symbols for bigger ideas that I don't think any of us would actually support in any context or environment. And I just feel like we're running the risk of trivializing and normalizing acts from this administration's in the communication space that we're going to regret. We're going to look back and say, we probably didn't see this for what it was, and we tried to make it similar to any other type of case study that we'd look at. And I just think that's a dangerous thing for us to do. But I'll get off my soapbox now because I know we got other things.
I like and I'm going to say Patty, because I'm not sure if I say Padraig, if I'm saying that right. So sorry, being on this side of the pond. But what Patty McKeon is saying is great summary by Farzana. If public opinion doesn't matter, and 100% on Trump's grasp of effective populist comms, selling people what they think they want to buy. I think he's nailed it, as did Farzana. And can we not separate, when I say effective communicator, can we not separate that from whether the effect is good or bad, to at least study the
I think we
mechanisms
can.
and methodology? Yeah.
I think we can, because you have responsible communications, and that is a totally different lens on whether communications is effective or not. And so if we're looking at it with a responsible communications lens, then there'll be a completely different discussion. But if we're looking at effectiveness and impact and the achievement of the objectives that have been set out, that's a different story. And that's where I think we blur.
We, the people, have an accountability to participate in ethical and unethical communication. We, the people, bear a lot of that responsibility.
I'm going to let this conversation move on because I'm disagreeing with you at some level.
It's all good. It's all good.
Where are we going next, Farzana? Remind me what we got next.
Now, next we have leading in the age of compounding crisis.
Okay, and I will try to make a little bit of a segue here. I think there were half a dozen events in the UK that I saw. They were all about leading during this time of uncertainty. I went to one question, great set of conversations about how we can kind of muster our better instincts to lead during this time of ambiguity. But an agency, a big agency called Fleischman Hillard, I have to acknowledge I did have some connection to them when I was at Omnicom, issued a report, and it's one of the better reports I've seen in this space. It's called Learning Through the Era of Compounding Crisis. I like that for a couple of reasons. One, my own firm, consultancy, uses the word compound, so I think it's an interesting way of looking at the cumulative effect. So we can no longer look at a crisis and put it in a certain category on the shelf. It does have a complexifying cumulative effect, and it tends to morph into other types of issues. They touch on a lot of issues that are personal areas of interest of mine. Misinformation. I've been trying for at least 2 years to get companies to think about this as a corporate issue rather than as just a government or public health issue. They talk about cybersecurity, kind of related to misinformation. They talk about geopolitical uncertainty. This is the last thing I'll probably say about Trump today. Nobody wants to actually label that. I've been in 50 meetings with chief communications officers, and they will talk about American policy, they'll talk about geopolitical uncertainty, but they don't want to name what's actually happening and what's behind that. I'll put that to one side. The thing that I thought was really interesting, though, and I did want your in particular reaction, Farzana, they talked about crisis as an impact on profit. And for some reason, that headline just really jumped out for me. And I thought, I have been talking about crisis for years and its impact on reputation, value of reputation, trust, institutional trust. And I think that that's the right thing to do. I don't want to get a whole bunch of emails saying I shouldn't back away from that. We do need to think about institutional trust and reputation. But when you frame the impact of a crisis in the language that I think most CEOs and boards are sensitive to, you say, this is actually going to impact your EBIT in the next quarter. If you don't deal with it this way, you've got their attention. And for some reason, that just struck me as a masterful way of talking about this. Maybe everybody's been talking about it. I'm just hearing about it now for the first time. But have you heard it? Crisis management framed as margin protection?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Because I mean, I've spent 16 years working across, government and corporate and also charities, and it's really interesting because the people who are very attuned to reputation as an asset are the politicians, because they know that's their currency, and that's what's going to help them remain in power. And the others are charities because they rely upon trust for donations and for delivering their work. But the ones that don't sometimes get it are usually the private sector. Because if you look at a lot of the leadership, the CEOs often come from a finance background. And so therefore, as a former accountant myself, the way that I normally communicate with boards and with CEOs is really bringing in that sort of language so that they can understand. And there's no point sort of talking to them about sort of, these sort of vague, abstract terms. So what I sort of talked to them instead about, well, actually, this company in your sector had a reputational crisis. And here's a lovely little graph about their stock market price and how it was there and then it ended there. And that's enough to sort of scare the bejesus out of them into actually understanding the value of it. So I think, going to sort of leadership in the corporate world, particularly those with a financial background, and often it's the CFOs who also release the budgets for the comms side, is really speaking their language. And that's classic PR. PR shouldn't be us PR people assuming everyone else is a PR person and has the same passion and understanding and the nuance of what PR is. But effective communications, what PR should do is they should know their audience. If the audience are money men or money women, you need to talk in that language. So you talk about reputation as a balance sheet item. You talk about story in terms of value, and you demonstrate evidential points. And you bring it close to home by saying, here's a lovely case study of your mates in your industry and what happened to them. And one of the biggest motivators in life, and this is general, is fear and the avoidance of pain. And and they're all PR tools for us to use.
Mm-hmm. There was an Oxfam study done, I think it's about 10 years ago, looking at the impact of crisis on stock prices. Because it always fascinated me, the BP oil spill, right? And in crisis training, we're always using that example. And what the Oxfam study found basically was the perception of how a company's responded to a crisis is the impact on stock price. So if the company is perceived to have responded poorly, there's absolutely a negative effect on the stock price, and it does tick back upward, but it's very slow, as in a couple of years to get back to where it was. Whereas if a company is perceived to have responded well to a crisis, there's the dip, but then there's this automatic rebound and a monetary benefit. the company's stock price actually benefits from the crisis having happened if you are perceived to have recovered well.
I mean, actually, it can be harnessed, crisis, to actually demonstrate how effective you are. Because actually,
Yeah.
if you look at it, crisis, I think the Chinese, they have a double meaning for the word crisis.
Yeah, I've heard that.
It also means opportunity. And I think you look at crisis as an opportunity to demonstrate to your stakeholders, both internal and external, that, you know what? We've got it. Because the biggest issue in crisis is not actually the underlying crisis, it's actually the response to it. Time and time again, we see it all again. A non-apology, sorry, not sorry, late apology, not sort of, really getting a handle and a grip on it.
I'm
sort of
sorry if
analysis
you were
paralysis.
offended. I'm sorry if you didn't understand.
Yeah, clearly your issue, not mine. So that is the issue. So I think when a crisis happens in your organization, instead of thinking, actually think to yourself, oh, let's lean in. Here's an opportunity. Let's demonstrate we know what we're doing, and let's just make sure. And it's not rocket science. It should be an apology. It should be heartfelt, quick, and none of it is complicated. But it's extraordinary how every time there's a public crisis, us PRs get together and say, what were they thinking?
There's a great little mini case, and I've mentioned this podcast before, Compounding Business, about Deloitte and basically a report they prepared for the Australian government and used AI, which I think most consultancies do. And I think that was probably disclosed. I can't remember that part of it, but the report had several hallucinations in it, some quotes attributed to people that didn't exist and references to things that weren't there. And Deloitte refunded, my understanding, part of the fee for this, but didn't apologize and didn't really acknowledge it further than that. And to your point, Farzana, I think that was a missed opportunity to acknowledge the wrong, but actually, if not turn this into an asset, at least turn it into a teachable, learnable moment and set some standards going forward. And I think if I remember what we were going to talk about, we got something similar, right? And I haven't followed this story. I know you have, but
speaking of teachable, learnable moments, this might be one for the government in the UK. I want to show you the logo or the brand refresh that they've done. Now, as I understand, is the previous UK government logo, black and white, pretty simple. And below, I would call this a logo refresh. Okay. And I don't even know if that's royal blue, but it's some form of blue. And the dot has been moved up slightly. I think it's a little larger. All good. Now, where this becomes contentious, the teachable moment is, according to public records, the cost for this, drum roll. Oh, look at that. Somebody. I don't know if that's David or Emily, but that is outstanding.
That was me, actually.
Oh, what's that? Oh, that's Farzana.
I've been dying to use the drum roll.
£500,000 or in dollars, in US dollars, I'm going to call that $800,000 US. $800,000 to change black and white to blue and move a dot. There was a Freedom of Information request. Gentleman named Matt Easton said, okay. Might be a lot going into this. Can you share the study work that you did that resulted in this very slightly nuanced logo? And the response from the UK government, no comment. So we're left with $800,000, £500,000. I have to adjust my European pricing for the services that I seek to provide in the UK. This is I'll leave that to the two of you as ratepayers in the UK. Are you happy with this?
I think the conversion you did was actually Canadian dollars, but I don't know I honestly don't know the story. I didn't know it until you mentioned it earlier. So I would have to reserve comment till I really understood it. But on the surface, it appears to be a questionable expenditure of funds.
I would say that, I've got a friend who's a brand strategist and works in a brand agency, and I often have conversations like I do with my other sort of professional service firms, to find out, what you do, how much you charge, and I am so envious they have big numbers that they charge, and they sort of wrap it around in this mystique of, you know, sort of alchemy. I mean, do you know how much work us PRs would have to do to bill 400 grand worth of work? And
Exactly.
then we'll be chewed to bits about, you know, KPIs and measurements and dismissed, and, you know, and then he, you know, a branding person walks in, moves a dot around, and then whacks them with almost £500,000, you know, invoice. So I think the biggest scandal is how much branding people charge versus us. But saying that, I do know the most incredibly talented brand strategists, and it is actually incredible what they can do and the impact. But they also charge very differently. Like, I've got a friend of mine who does font design for all the big brands. He has retired early. Why? Because actually he charges royalty on those sort of logos
Oh my
every
gosh.
year in perpetuity until there's another brand refresh. So I think the real story is us PRs need to speak to our branding brethren and find out how they charge, how we can charge like that, and how we can get away with £500,000. But of course, they need us now to sort out the scandal created by this. And we will be charging significantly less than what they walked away with. But as a taxpayer, am I delighted about it? No.
Right.
Do I think, you know, thank God for the freedom of information that we could actually get this information. And what would be very telling is what the government response will be. You know, as one of our tuned in community just said, never let a good crisis go to waste. Let's see what the government does about this crisis and what they come out with. Are they going to kick it into the long grass, or are they going to confront it? That will be interesting.
The logo went blue and ratepayers went red. I could get a job with the Sun writing headlines like that, couldn't I?
Nobody does it better than you do. So, Farzana, tell us both about this Netflix thing that you spoke about. You mentioned you were doing this, and I misunderstood. I was in Mayfair, and there was a big Netflix filming going on, and I thought you were being filmed there, and I realized actually it was something else. So set us straight. What were you talking about?
Yeah. Do we have a video that we can push in?
Yeah.
Latest example of what's known in the trade as an authorised access documentary. To assess the PR strategy for brand Beckham, I was joined by Farzana Baduel, founder of public relations company Curzon PR.
I think you get an inkling of the strategic thinking behind the documentary in terms of the timing. So they dropped the trailer a couple of weeks ago, Fashion Month, September. Happens to have a fashion brand. As we speak, there's a pop-up at Selfridges. And so there's definitely a commercial play. And I think if you think about the brand trajectory of Victoria Beckham's fashion brand, it was loss-making for a number of years, and it turned a corner when they went into beauty. But also what happened when they went into beauty, all of a sudden, she had to attract a mass market because a lot of people couldn't afford a £2,000 jacket or skirt. And so she didn't have to go and do the sort of the mass play. But now with everyone can buy a bit of Victoria Beckham with an eyeliner, for instance. And so actually having a documentary in Netflix with a mass appeal, a mass sort of exposure really helps from a commercial perspective. So, I mean, basically what happened is the BBC producer was looking for a PR spokesperson, came across this show, The Week Unspun, and invited me in to come and have a chat about it. And it was incredibly daunting. I mean, I love the BBC, but they had me speaking on this segment. I was right at the end, and they had, I think the editor-in-chief of The Economist, they had two people from Panorama, and then I think they had the sort of Russia's BBC correspondent. So of course, as a PR, I was absolutely terrified to be in a room with these journalists. And I don't know what it is about PRs and journalists. I always feel really nervous around them and slightly fangirly. And I just have to really suppress my instinct to act professional in that BBC studio and not just jump on them and pitch a client's story to them. So, so I was really proud of myself not to jump on them. But really it was about actually, is there a decline in journalism and the impact on society where documentaries are no longer having this sort of rigorous editorial control, and instead you've got Victoria Beckham, her husband is producing documentaries from a production company that he's a part owner of. So what sort of pushback, what sort of resistance, and do the actual public know the difference between a documentary, say from Panorama, versus a sort of one that's created? And of course you had Michelle Mo Simone, who did a documentary that landed poorly, but actually now you can really, a good PR around the documentary, you can craft those sort of moments of vulnerability so it doesn't look like a puff piece. So that was what the conversation is. Available on BBC, the media show, if you want to watch the full show. I had a glorified all of, I think, barely 2 minutes, but I was grateful just to be sitting in the same room as journalists that I admire. But absolutely fascinating. What's your take, Doug and David?
Well, I thought you nailed it, and that they're going for a different audience and trying to disperse their message. So I thought your accent was a little thicker. Is that a BBC required? You sounded a little bit like Penelope's Posh Spice. Is that what you do on BBC?
I think I was just I was so scared actually, because I hate sort of like doing sort of live stuff. I mean, I you guys are friends, so I feel more relaxed, but these guys, I had like these incredible journalists that I've always looked up to. So I was terrified, and I was just trying to, sort of like, I thought to myself, try and impress them. They always look down on us PRs, and I always feel like a poor cousin when I'm in a room with journalists. And so I was really trying to sort of be very BBC in the hope that they'll invite me back again.
You nailed
and
it.
I won't make a fool of myself. But basically, I just said, you know what? I said, does a PR want Panorama, Channel 4 sniffing around their clients? Hell no, that's like a cold shower. Do we want a sort of documentary on our clients that's owned by a production company, that is owned by one of our clients? Yes, that's a warm bath. But is it good for society? No.
Well, I thought you nailed it too. I know we're out of time. We need to there's a former colleague of mine who did PR, he's actually a current colleague for both of the Beckhams after he left our agency. I would love to get him on and hear his take. But you raised some great questions about the role of documentaries. Do the average consumer understand how they shifted? So I thought it was a great conversation. So much I wish we could have gotten into, but I think we touched on a lot. Doug, you want to take us out? We're going to see you next week live in person.
I am coming to London. I'm going to spend some time with Farzana, and then David and Farzana together. I'm really looking forward to it. It's a long way to travel, right? Different hours and all that. I've been acclimating myself, eating beans on toast for the last 2 weeks. So I'll be ready. That is all the time we have today. I'll leave you with a last thought. A quote from Jane Goodall, who passed away 9 days ago. What you do makes a difference, and you have to decide what kind of difference you want to make. Well said. Hope you enjoyed today's discussion. Special thanks, as always, to producers Emily Page, David Olajide. The Week Unspun is a co-production of Curzon Public Relations, Folgate Advisors, and Stories and Strategies. If you'd like to join the Advisory Club Mega Chat, please get in touch with David on LinkedIn. We'll see you next week. Have a killer weekend.